Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Richards, Technical Services Manager of the Managing General Agents Association, and on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to our briefing this afternoon. This is being delivered by the Lloyds Market Association with their Computable Binding Authority Agreement Phase 1 Deep Dive. I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. Please ensure your microphone and camera are turned off unless contributing. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Time allowing, these will be asked and answered at the end of the event. If we run out of time, questions will be answered post-event. This presentation is accredited for CPD hours if relevant to your ongoing professional development programme. The briefing is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be issued post-event, together with our feedback survey. Please take the time to complete our survey. It will take no longer than 2 minutes and does allow us to continue to deliver the best possible future events to our membership. So as a recap, today's briefing is Computable Binding Authority Agreement Phase 1 Deep Dive from LMA. So let me introduce you to our presenter, Carla Wise. Carla has been leading the charge to modernise DA since joining the LMA in 2020. Prior to joining the LMA, Carla worked in DA and operations roles at various Lloyds and dual platform managing agencies. So without further ado, let me pass across to Carla to begin the briefing. So Carla, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Tim. So welcome, everyone. We will absolutely get going nice and quickly because we've got a lot to cover today. So just want to cover off for you your learning outcomes. So by the end of this session, you should be able to describe the basic data concepts that have been applied in the BAA redesign. I'm really sorry, I'm just struggling with my mouse for a second. Sorry. Okay, we'll go back on. So I'm just going to repeat that again. So you should be able to describe the basic data concepts that have been applied to the CBA redesign, explain the key changes proposed for our first phase modules, which are the modules 5, 7 and 8. And you should also be able to outline the key project work streams and target timelines that we're working to. A bit about me, Tim's already covered that, so not much more to say there, but I will give you my contact details at the end in case you have any questions. So our agenda today, first of all, I just want to touch on why we're doing this work on the computable contract and why now. Also, I will give you an overview of the programme work streams. This is quite a big programme, so it's important that you have an oversight of all the different components that make it up. We're then going to dig into some basic data science concepts and some of the terminology that I will be using throughout the rest of the presentation. And as we continue to kind of move to be a digital marketplace, it's really important that we're kind of getting familiar with this new language. We're then going to have a look at the CBAA design principles, which have been agreed by our DA Wordings group, who are sort of leading the charge on creating this new model wording. We'll then go into the key features of modules 5, 7 and 8. So we've got the first draft of those ready. And again, they've been seen by our DA Wordings group. So I want to share with you the key features and hopefully if there's time at the end, get some feedback on any of those or answer further questions. We'll then recap the programme work streams and look at some key dates that are coming up this year and then just sort of a few closing remarks. So I just want to set the scene of why we're working on a computable binding authority agreement at this moment in time. So some of you on the call will probably remember the market engagement piece we did back in 2021, which was called Delegated Authority Reimagined, or for short, DARE. I think we use DARE mostly when we talk about that now. And we really worked with all different DA stakeholders from all different areas of the market, cover holders, brokers, managing agents, claims representatives to bring everyone together, get all their pain points out and come up with a vision And that vision was for a digital DA marketplace. So since 2021, the market has moved on a bit, and we probably hear a bit more about this move to a digital marketplace sort of across the board rather than just focusing on DA. But at the time, that was a little bit more forward thinking. So everything we are doing now with the CBAA is because we are starting to realise that vision. So there's been some sort of activity that has taken place in the market in the DA space over the last few years that has perhaps been a bit more siloed, and we've just kind of picked odd things that we think we should work on. And I just wanted to absolutely make clear that the reason we are delivering or setting out to deliver the computable binding authority agreement at this point in time is because it is part of our vision. And for us, it absolutely made sense as the first step to realizing a digital marketplace. So if you think about some attempts we've had to push forward with the digitization, we tried with DDM, for example, and we were really focused on how do managing agents and brokers get hold of that sort of declaration level data, which is great. We all need that, and I know underwriters today will say that's the sweet spot. That's what we really need. But perhaps we didn't quite succeed in that endeavor because we didn't start in the right place. And if you think about the sort of version 5.2 standard, a lot of the information that you're being asked to provide as cover holders on there is contract information. So it kind of makes sense to start that digitization journey and that data journey with a focus on the contract and the contract data. And then you can kind of append all of the declaration level data to that. So that's why we chose, or one of the reasons we chose to start realizing our vision with the computable binding authority agreement. So the other thing we have, as well as wanting to be a digital marketplace, is a really out of date binding authority agreement wording. So what we are looking to do through this exercise is two key things. We want to redraft the contractual language to reflect current practice and market needs and really bring it up to date. It needs an overhaul. But rather than doing that exercise in silo, it made sense to do that exercise at the same time as trying to turn that language into data from which we can produce digital contracts. So killing two birds with one stone, if you like. And that does make it a little bit more complicated, and probably it's going to take a bit more time, but it's absolutely the right thing to do. And it allows us really to design those digital foundations that have perhaps been lacking in other DA initiatives we've seen in the market. So the whole programme is comprised of these 10 work streams, and our absolute focus at the moment is on the draft design and modularization of the contract. If we get this bit right and design something that's really robust, hopefully the technology build that follows will be a lot smoother and a lot simpler. So I don't want to linger too much on this because I will come back and talk through it in more detail if we've got time at the end. But as I said, really want to focus on work stream A and what we can, what benefits can be delivered from that work stream alone in the short term. So as I said, there was two parts to this contract. Let's think about the wording, but let's also turn the contract and the words into data. And in order to do this, we needed to apply some basic data science concepts to our design process. And I'm going to talk you through some of these things now. So the digital world, it has its own language, and data things are known as data objects. And this is just something I wanted to put out there first, because you'll hear me talk about all different sorts of objects as we go through this presentation. And these are just a way to describe different pieces or components of data. So what we have today is a large monolith text document with largely unstructured data, and it's really difficult to do anything with it. Even in the way that today we have the wording and the schedule, you have a schedule which sort of lends itself towards wanting to be a data structure or somewhere where we collect usable data, but we don't actually insert that data into the schedule in a way that machines would be able to read it. And the fact that this is just one thing makes it really hard to use for computers. So what we will have in the future is a modular object. And the contract itself will be called a digital contract object. And just the key difference there is we're breaking it down into pieces. So I will talk in a moment about how we're breaking our contract down into modules. And then within each of those modules, there'll be lots of smaller objects and different parts, but it's all about lots of components and how they get put together. So the different types of objects that are going to be common to the Computable Binding Authority Agreement. So first, and I think most importantly, we're going to have the contract text objects. So these just basically are the clauses, the text and the language, and we're going to put a box around each clause, which helps us turn that into data. We're also going to have things called embedded variables, which is variable elements that sit within the words. We'll also have reference data structures, document objects, guidance objects, and the formatting of these objects is really important. Don't worry, I'm about to explain to you a bit more about what each of those object types is and the purpose it serves. Just before I do that, again, some more sort of data science language. So when we talk about elements, that's a single data item. Rules are really important because that's about how we can then use that data in a specific way. And rules will obviously lead to automation, which is where we all want to be, making our lives easier so that we can all concentrate on more value add tasks. Once we have all of these data objects, we can't really do anything with them unless they have attributes. So this is the metadata where we start to describe the different objects and kind of give them titles and associate them with different things. And that's where relationships between those data items become important, and dependencies, which is a specific way of describing the relationship between two different objects. And all of that information is really important. So if you imagine when we have the computable binder, if you imagine it in terms of like an Excel document, you might have one cell which has the text or the contract object within it. And then you might have another sort of 30 rows that are used to describe that text object, which will then help us use it and again automate. So first of all, what we have here is a contract text object. So this is a plain text object. So there's nothing in this but text. But again, we're able to give this clause structure by putting a box around it. And as I just described, giving it various attributes to allow the application of rules. There are some other different types of text objects which are a little bit more complex. So I apologize for the fuzzy kind of top picture. It didn't look like that on my screen. But what we have then is a contract text object with an embedded variable. So this is a data element that can or will change from contract to contract. So at this stage, we're assuming the words will remain the same, but we might want to choose this, change this specific part. So that embedded variable, it can be a single data element or an array. And an array is kind of terminology I'd heard before, but maybe not quite understood. So it's just a series of connected data elements. So here in this example, we've got an array. 10 is one element and business days is another element, but they are connected. You need both of them for the variable to make sense. So alternatively, you could have something here that said 30 calendar days. Again, embedded variables could perhaps be a user choice, or they might actually be specified by some rules. So say, for an example, a regulator says you have to use calendar days, then that would be in a certain territory, then that might be automated. So throughout the CBAA, variables are going to be shown in red. So one of the important things is if we're going to perhaps move slightly away from having a separate wording and schedule, is that any elements that are variables need to stand out. And that's what we've done. We'll always show them in red. So the variables themselves, they can be drawn from a comprehensive data structure. So think they might be populated by using a list of values, a bit like perhaps the ISO territory codes, or they might just be some free text that the contract creator has to fill in as they're going through the workflow. So we then have contract text objects that have referenced data structures, and throughout the CBA we are showing these in blue. So a data structure is essentially a collection of contract variables, and it's somewhere where you've got too much information, you can't embed it in the words, so you need to reference it. A bit like we do today with the wording and the schedule, but rather than just having everything in one place, we might have a series of tables so that you can look at that specific item from the schedule right at the time you're looking at the contractual provision that it relates to. So hopefully you get that better tie-in between contract provision and contract specific variable. As it says here, there's a choice for how that data can be shown. So you might click on it and have it open in a new window, or you might hover over it with your mouse and it's shown in sort of a mouse over or a bubble. But again, these are things that we'll be working through with the DA wordings group, and also when we start to move into the contract creator build, working with the market to see what works best for the user experience. And just that last point there, data structures can be pre-existing, or they can be populated by the user, which I think I covered. So this is just, again, an overview and a bit less fuzzy of those different types. You have a regular sort of contract text object, which is just words. And then you have contract text objects with reference data structures. And then you can have contract text objects with embedded variables. And this is largely what the new contract will be made up of. So it's really important when you're doing something with data that you have an information model. So this is kind of probably a little bit techie for me and probably for you, but I just wanted to show you that we're really thinking about this and about how all of those different types of data and different types of objects connect with each other. And it's really important to have a model laid out so that we have a consistent approach. So for every module, all of the different objects are relating to each other in a consistent way. Okay, so that's the kind of the data science piece and some of the sort of design approaches we'll be taking. I now just want to talk to you a bit about the kind of the language piece and the redraft of the wording and some of the design principles that we've got. So before I do that, I just want to maybe remind some people or introduce others to the modules that are going to form part of the Computable Binding Authority Agreement going forward. So we have 15 contract modules. And there is potential, because this is a complete sort of, work in progress and we're creating as we go along, that we might end up with just 14 modules, or we might need 16. So the contract itself is a modular object. As I said, 15 modules. Module 3 is key. And what that does is that sets the high level authorities and states which regulated activities the cover holder can and which it cannot undertake. And then for each of those activities, you will have a related module that goes into the specific details of their authority and exactly what they are and are not allowed to do. Each of those modules, as I mentioned earlier, will be made up of a variety of data objects, as I just described to you. And when we set out on this, we did hope for these modules to be sort of islands of functionality, so sort of working on their own as much as possible. But as we've kind of gone through the process so far, it is apparent that there are going to be quite a lot of interdependencies between modules, which is fine, but we just need to make sure we manage that correctly. One of the other things that we've noticed as we've gone through the drafting process is that many of the clauses in the 3113 at the moment are perhaps in the wrong place, and they might need to move into another module. As you really start to think about what is the function of this module, what is it trying to do, you start to say, oh, this is in the wrong place, and let's put it somewhere else. I'm really sorry, my mouse is, there we go, it's back again. Okay, so as I said, our focus at the moment is very much on drafting, designing, and modularizing the binding authority agreement wording. And one of the key things that I really want to draw out here is that our intention is to move to a single model wording for bind agreements that can be used interchangeably between and across markets, classes, and territories. So what does that actually mean? So we have approximately 180 DA wordings or clauses in the Lloyd's Wordings repository at the moment, and the intention is to combine all of these into a single wording that can be used or that will vary in parts based on certain conditions. This consolidation exercise also includes the IUA's binding authority template and Lloyd's Europe's CAA template. So what you can see on the screen here, and noted you probably can't see the detail, but it's just to kind of give you an overview, is we have a comparison tracker where we put all of the clauses of those current agreements into Excel so that we can really compare the language. And the analysis of those main wordings has told us that 70% of the time language is consistent across the board, which also sort of tells you, why do you need entirely separate agreements for perhaps the US or Canada when the majority of it is the same? And what we're really trying to drive here is consistency. So if the language doesn't change, why have a separate wording? And then what we're able to do with this tracker is every time we start work on a new module, we set up a requirements document, and part of that requirements document is sort of a summary of the key changes. So if we go in here, we say, well, Lloyd's Europe wants something really different for data protection and compliance to what we've got in the LMA 3113. We need to make sure we incorporate that variation in what we're doing. Okay. So I'm just going to walk you through all of those key design principles now. So the other thing that we want to do, or we're going to be doing, is revising, expanding, or removing language to reflect where we are now. And this goes to the point that the wordings we have at present are out of date, and we know that they were sort of put together in 2013. So over 10 years, things have definitely moved on. So we have a change requests log, and we went out a year or so ago to various DA stakeholders, including cover holders, and I know Mike on behalf of the MGA put in a few requests. So again, every time we come to a module, we look at that log, we see what changes might be pertinent to that module, and we include them in our requirements. And with the DA wordings group, we work through, and some of them we decide perhaps we don't want to incorporate, and some of them we do. I've just got an example here of how we are expanding language. So we now are going to have the provision for cascading risk transfer. So again, this is something that just isn't in the contract today, but we know lots of managing agencies will require some language if they are going to give the permission for cascading risk transfer on the binder, but we also know that in Ireland and Italy, that's mandatory. So again, at the moment, we could have lots of variations of how insurers choose to put contractual provisions in for that. And what we're trying to do is drive consistency. So again, cascading risk transfer in the cases of Ireland and Italy would be included automatically via a set of rules. And there would also be the choice for the user to say, do they want to allow cascading risk transfer on that particular contract? And if they do, those provisions would be included. So just an example of how we're expanding the language. There's many more examples. We also want to adopt and simplify the language of the contract. One of the points that has come up is that most people that deal with the binding authority agreements are not lawyers. So let's just make that language as simple as possible, but equally making sure it stands up in court. So we do have a couple of lawyers who are part of our DA wordings group. So believe me, they're always quite keen to tell us if the language needs to be amended in terms of standing up in court. And then the other thing that we're doing to simplify things is increasing the use of titles. So at the moment, in the 3113, for example, each section has a header. We're going to increase that because we just think that really helps people understand a single provision or the group of provisions that they're looking at any given time. We also want to use market, class and territory agnostic language wherever possible to support smoother changes in capacity. We know now that there's a higher turnaround of capacity and we see a lot more mixed market binders. So we don't want language that prohibits a certain market from coming on board. And equally, if a new market does come on board, we don't want to have to kind of rewrite all the language in the contract. So some examples of this is the term underwriters and managing agents is now going to be replaced with insurers throughout the agreement. And this is good because it kind of incorporates Lloyd's Europe, for example. And what we're going to do is we're going to use definitions. So definitions are something that's missing from the current agreements. We're going to have a definition section so that it's much easier for us to use that agnostic language. And then another example is Lloyd's Europe have agreed that we can move away from using appointed cover holder and just replace that with cover holder. Again, using the definitions to sort of put the Lloyd's Europe slant on that where it's appropriate. We also want to embed standard endorsements in the main body of the wording. So this is, again, talking about all of those DA documents that are held in the Lloyd's Wordings repository. Let's not have them appended at the back of the binder anymore. Let's think about what module they belong in and let's put them in the flow of the wording where it makes sense to do so. And a really good example of that is the 5321B. I think I've got that number right. I sometimes get all those numbers round the wrong way, but that endorsement, for example, is going to be split up because actually parts of it work best in certain modules for it to make sense. So no longer will it be kind of an endorsement in its own right, but it will be split out throughout the contract into the main body of the wording. But equally, each of those contract text objects that relate to that endorsement can be tagged so that if you want to view them sort of as a collective, you can do that as well. And that's the really beautiful thing about this digital contract, is that you can view the data in any number of given ways. So I talked about a bit about this briefly earlier, about it embedding variables within the main body of the wording. And you can see the example I've got here. So this is for territorial limitations. So we kind of have two options for how we might use either an embedded variable or a referenced data table. So as you can see, option A And this might work for a simple binder where there's perhaps just one territory. The cover holder is authorised to bind insurances only for risks located in Spain, policyholders domiciled in Spain, and where the regulatory risk location falls within Europe, perhaps. The territorial limits of insurances bound under this agreement must not extend beyond Europe. But equally, if we have a more complex binder that has multiple territories and multiple classes, it might be better to view that information in a table. And again, where we've got the blue there, you could click on the table and it would pop up in a new window. But I will talk about Module 5 in a bit more detail and that exact example in a second. So we want to construct the contract so that it will include only in-force language. So this example from what we have in the current 3113 in section 24, if you see this 24.3, it reads, if the cover holder. So what we will do is, if the cover holder isn't responsible for claims, that clause just won't be in there. So again, it makes the contract much more succinct, and we're just getting to the point. Everything that we read in the contract is applicable. No more of this, sort of reading a couple of pages only to find that in 6.1 there's an endorsement that overwrites it all. And again, we think that this is really important for people's understanding. Another principle is to align with industry standards. And this is really important in Module 5. And again, I'll come to that. So examples here, the term policy will replace the term insurance or contract. And the term policyholder will replace the term insured. What we have found on examining all this different wordings is that actually we're sometimes not consistent with the terminology. And what we're doing here is we're aligning with the CDR terminology. So the CBA embedded variables, such as authorised territories, they will align to the CDR data items here. And as will insurable interests will also align with CDR reference data. So those kind of common lists of values that we've already agreed for the CDR will absolutely be applied in the binder. We're not going to go off and start creating our own lists or our own terminology. And if it's not something that's in the CDR, then we're definitely going to look to abide by the kind of Accord standards as well. Another aspect of how we're aligning with industry standards is that the DA Wordings Group have supported a move to using authorised insurable interests as terminology to set the types of risk a cover holder is authorised to write under a binder, rather than authorised classes. But again, I'm going to dig into that a little bit more when I talk about Module 5. Another aspect that is kind of missing in the contract today is clear and contractual assignment of roles and responsibilities. The intention is to bring key roles and responsibilities currently addressed in the subscription agreement into the main body of the wording. So, for example, one of those sometimes the roles and responsibilities and what you have to do in a binder is specifically related to the policyholder classification. At the moment, policyholder classification is in the subscription agreement, and we're going to move that into the main body of the wording. We're also going to have a whole module dedicated to operational responsibilities. And this is where responsibilities of the cover holder, the lead insurer, and where applicable, the broker, that will be dotted throughout the contract are then brought together in a single overview, just to help everyone be really clear on what role it is they play. And this will really help us with the problem we have today with duplication. And we have lots of people all doing the same things. And I think hopefully you'll agree that the way we operate today, a lot of those operational responsibilities are just sort of agreed, or that, they're not written down anywhere. It's just a nod and a handshake. So it's probably time to formalize some of that. And territory specific responsibilities will also be addressed in this module. So, for example, sometimes if a cover holder is doing business in a certain territory, they might have to make sure for any risks written in that territory, they let the local regulator know. So because this is an activity and something the cover holder is responsible for doing, it will appear in the operational responsibilities section. Okay, so now we're just going to dig into the key features of the new modules as we've got them in the first draft. So module 5, scope of underwriting authority. For those of you that know the current wording sort of off bat, which I've made some assumptions that people on this call will absolutely do, our module 5 comprises current sections 7 to 15 and 26. It's a data-heavy module, and it contains the key contract variables to define what types of risks can be underwritten. So sitting behind module 5 will be a really large data structure where we almost imagine like an Excel spreadsheet where we're capturing all the variables that the user would put in when they're using the contract creator. And then we have this really big table, and as I alluded to earlier, we have a choice of how we can display that information captured in that table. So we might use embedded variables for the more simple contracts, or we may use a table. So I've got for you here, and again, this is just done on Excel at the moment because the whole of this project is very much a work in progress. But this is an example of what the table might look like. So you've got, first of all, what it might look like for a single class binder, and what it may look like for a binder with different segments. So I think that is quite nice to look at. And essentially, if we go along the route of most things being in the table, rather than module 5 having lots of words, it will really just be a table. Sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing on me. There we go. Okay. So as you can see here, as it's stated here, the complexity of that data structure will dictate how it's best to render or display the information. So it might be in one table as we just saw, but if you think about that kind of had 3 sections, if you start having a binder that has 7 or 8, that's probably going to be too much information to put on one screen. So we might need to show it in 3 tables, for example. But this here is the type of language that we would have in module 5. So the cover holder is authorised to bind policies in accordance with the information contained in the scope of underwriting authority table defined as part of this agreement. And you would click on that blue and you would see the table that we've just shown up. So one of the things that we didn't necessarily have in the first draft that the DA Wordings group were quite keen to incorporate was having some of the contractual language included in the table. So as you can see from this example I've got at the bottom, the cover holder is authorized to bind policies for risks located in the US, specifically Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, for policyholders domiciled in the US and the UK with a territorial limit of the US within regulatory risk locations of the US. So you kind of get the table and the language in one. So that's the approach that we're leaning to at the moment. And hopefully when we get to the second draft and we're then able to share that with the wider market, we can get your feedback on what you think. And again, after this session, happy to take feedback. So not all contractual provisions in module 5 will work well in a table. And this is an example of one of those. So this is where the basis for the calculation of gross premiums and setting deductibles and excesses and the cover holder's level of authority has actually been simplified and put into one far more succinct clause. And what you see here is 5.9 at the top is an example of what you might have. And then if you see everything in green below, they are the 5 options that you would be able to pick from. So again, this is where the user has the choice, which one is relevant to this binder. And then at the top is what you would see within that binder. So the underwriting guidelines referred to above, as they're in the blue, will be a reference document object. So we haven't had this one before. We talked about reference data structure, but there'll also be times, like with the underwriting guidelines, they're going to be different in every case. We're not going to be able to digitize them at this stage. So what we will have is an embedded PDF or an attached PDF. But again, it's not hovering about at the back of the contract. You can click on it there and it will open in a new window. We discussed this at length in the DA wordings group, and it was noted that sometimes the lead insurer will not necessarily want followers to view the underwriting guidelines, because I guess that's a bit of the secret sauce stuff. So what you can see here is the red with the embedded variable. The lead insurer, it could also read insurers. So in the example in case I have here, it would only be the lead insurer registered on the binder that would be able to view those underwriting guidelines, while followers would be able to see the contract. If they clicked on that link, they wouldn't be able to see it because the lead insurer said they want to keep it private. So this contract and the way that we put the words together will also enable us to put certain restrictions on what people can see and help us manage that access control piece. And another key feature that I did touch upon earlier is this move of terminology. So at the moment, we use class to set what the cover holder is allowed to write. And what we want to do is move to using insurable interest. So as part of the CDR, when they were creating the CDR, what they wanted to do was use class. But what we found is there's not one kind of standard set of definitions from class. There's different lists of class where you look, everyone used that differently. And say, for example, if you had a contract that came in and it was to insure a jet and a yacht, you have the problem of everyone goes, well, I don't really know where to put this because it doesn't fit in any one category. So with the CDR, they kind of felt, well, class isn't doing what it needs to do. And in a nutshell, in a digital world where we want to automate stuff, class isn't going to work. So they've moved to this idea of insurable interest. And that's what we want to try and employ here. So as you can see, what we've got is we've got 4 different levels of groups. So we've got the high level insurable interest type group. Then we get a bit more granular and we've got the subgroup, and then you've got the insurable interest type and the additional grade. And what we want to do is use these to define the scope of authority. But we do acknowledge that these groupings alone are not going to be enough to set the scope of cover holder authority. So we may need to, or we definitely will need to add the option to select from these high level groups, but then allow the user to add some free text that gives more description. So from the binders that I've looked at, in order sort of to get into the weeds of this project, some binders are really high level and literally just say, here's property. And some binders go into quite a lot of detail in how they describe the risks that the cover holder is allowed to underwrite. So we've kind of got to cater for both of those. And I think this is probably one of the biggest changes of the whole contract that we need to work through. And I'm very happy to send out this this list here in this hierarchy of how these insurable interest type work. So you could perhaps have a look for your binders and think, okay, well, or how would I categorize this binder in the new way? And what would I say in the free text field? And here I'm just, and this is a copy from the table that I showed you earlier. which is where it talks about that insurable interests types, and you would see that it works fixed property. The next one is fixed property. Then we have a split in between residential and commercial. So the additional grain that could be used as a more detailed descriptor. And actually, when we discussed this with the DA Wordings group, they did lean towards saying, well, let's just add more instances to the additional grain list of values, so that we're getting away from free text. But here you can see the free text options that have been added by the user, just as an example of how this might work. So just to summarize then for module 5, it's driven by a large data structure which stores the contract variables. Variables can be inserted within the text as an embedded variable, or viewed as a table that opens in a new window, and contractual language can be incorporated into that table. The basis for the calculation of gross premiums and deductibles and excesses has been combined with the level of authority into a single clause. Underwriting guidelines and rating matrices will be included as document objects. So that's perhaps a PDF, clickable, and then viewed in a new window. And access to those documents can be restricted. And we're going to move to use authorised insurable interests as the terminology to set the types of risks a cover holder is authorised to write under a binder. And the use of high-level insurable interest type groupings will be used in conjunction with more detailed free text descriptors. Okay, so moving on to module 7. This is evidence of policies bound. So again, those of you that are familiar with the 3113, this module 7 comprises section 19 and section 20. So again, at the moment in section 19, it's just one option. And what we are proposing in the new module 7 is that for application or proposal forms, we will have 3 options. And you can see there's here option 1, the type and format of application or proposal forms to be used in relation to this agreement is at the discretion of the cover holder. So obviously I think what the feedback we had on this is quite often managing agents don't mind, so it's just up to the cover holder what they do. You then have the second option where application or proposal forms to be used by the cover holder must be agreed prior to use. And again, there's the option for who they need to be agreed by. Generally, I imagine just the lead, but there may be cases where the subscription market want to see them as well. Perhaps in the case where you just have sort of like 3 players on the binder or something. And then the third option is where we actually are going to be very specific, and those forms are going to be appended to the binder. So hopefully, again, that gives some flexibility in how you want to manage that for a specific contract. So the format and content of policy documentation attracts a lot of attention from regulators. And so there are lots of territory-specific provisions. Equally, wordings and endorsements will vary by insurable interest type. So the best way to deal with this variation, especially for more complex binders, is to use a reference data structure table. So similarly to module 5, the information could be displayed in a single table or a series of tables. And the wording that you will have is very similar to module 5. All insurances bound shall be subject to the wordings, conditions, clauses, endorsements, warranties, and exclusions as stated in the policy documentation table. You'll click and it will come up in a new window. The bit where there's a difference with module 5 are many of the variables within the policy documentation table will be determined by the application of rules rather than user choice. So again, as I've talked about before, sometimes things will automatically appear and sometimes the user will be given the option to use them or not. So another key thing that we're changing in module 7 is at the moment, this is the area where we talk about, well, we use the language combined certificates, but actually it goes a bit beyond just using the certificates. So what we talked about with the group was using the idea of co-insurance, because that's what we're really saying here. Is the cover holder authorised to write co-insurance? And we would add that authorisation into module 5, scope of authority. And if the cover holder is granted the authority to write co-insurance, then there would be provisions relating to the contract document issued for co-insurance risks in module 7. So just a point to note, one of the members of the DA Wordings group said that if a cover holder is a follow on an open market placement led by the company market, for example, they may not have the ability to dictate the format of contract documentation issued. And so we should have some language that addresses that issue in the event that they do have co-insurance. And finally, what we have here is something in section 28, which talks about taxes being shown on the documentation. And really, we think that this clause sits in the wrong place and it should be incorporated into module 7. As I noted at the outset, a bit of sort of the right clause in the wrong place, and we need to do some jigging around. Really quick summary there of what the changes are for module 7. I'm not going to go through that in the interest of time, but it will be there when I share the slides for you. So finally, moving on to module 8. So the design approach taken for claims has been to replace the current claims language in the 3113 and other various versions of that with language from the 9188 DCA agreement. So what we're doing here is saying what we've got now isn't really robust enough, and we want to have sort of a much wider set of contractual provisions that mirrors what DCAs have to do in the event that the cover holder handles the claims. So because the 9118 is a standalone contract, it actually duplicates much of the language what you have in the 3113. So when we're having this idea of saying, let's use the 9118, a lot of that language won't appear in module 8 for claims. It will be outsourced to other modules. And actually, in the kind of redrafting exercise and bringing the 3113 up to date, because the 9118 is a more modern and kind of a more recently drafted contract, it actually improves the language we have in the 3113. So some of the redrafting we would otherwise have had to have done is already done, and we can use the language from the 9118 in sort of just to be applicable across the agreement. Module 8 is going to be really flexible because we're aware that a cover holder might have been used to having just sort of a couple of specific things they had to do in the claim space if they had that authority, and we're probably now going to beef that up a lot. So the managing agents on the particularly the claims people on the DAWG wanted to have things like a pick list for the SLAs, because a cover holder handling claims is never going to be able to report and do things in the same timescales as a DCA. So we have to be mindful of the size and the scope of that cover holders claims handling authority, and that it's appropriate to them, and that we manage this sort of transition to a more robust contractual framework for claims handling. Again, I'm going to skip through these, but when I share, this is detail of how the 9118 has been split across all the different modules. And here the sections, the main sections of the claims module will be the type of claims authority, referrals, philosophy and reserving, SLAs, and then claim payment authority and agreement parties. We'll also see in the contract that where the cover holder has no claims handling authority, there will literally just be 2 or 3 clauses in module 8, but this will include, because again, this was a note that we have from the cover holder, sometimes they don't know who's handling the claims on their business, so we want to include that in the contract. Okay, and I'm not going to summarize there because we'll move on in the interest of time. Again, just a brief recap of the project work streams. Everything I've talked about today is all work stream A, and is really about us designing those digital foundations so that we can be successful as we start to translate some of this into actual technology builds and sort of software and applications that people can use. But probably just a couple of key ones to talk about is the digital wordings objects library. So at the moment, we have the LWR, and what we will have is something in the Limos Market Business Glossary. So as well as accessing the wordings through a contract creator, you will also be able to kind of go in and look at them cold and just sort of kind of in their raw form through the Market Business Glossary. And the contract creator that we build, and indeed any other contract creators that sort of vendors in the market want to build, they will all draw on the documents held in the digital library within the Market Business Glossary. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in there like access and control model. We know that this has been why sort of DCOM and Chorus have had issues, and it's absolutely important to us that we really nail that this time and we don't get it wrong. But as I touched upon earlier, some of the ways we are constructing the contract will actually help us with that access and control model. And then again, just the data store is really important. There's no point in us capturing all of this information if you can't get your hands on it. So the idea is to have a central data store that all contracting parties, as well as the broker, can dip into that same single source of truth data store for everything that's held for individual instances of a CBAA. Okay, so now you've heard of all of that, what are the key dates? What can you expect to be delivered when? So at the moment, we're actually in a period of replanning towards the end of that period now. But when we started this piece of work, we made a lot of assumptions in terms of what we could achieve by when. And now we've been working at this since September. We've got a much better idea of what we'll be able to achieve by when. So early indications from that work is that and this is an aspirational date for those first cohort of CBAAs. We were previously hoping for them to incept from the 1st of April 2025, but we think what's more realistic is the 1st of July. So that's what we're putting out there. In terms of actually drafting the CBA modules, that's on track and running as was planned from September. And last week, the DA Wordings Group saw the first draft of modules 6, 9, 10 and 11. We're starting now with some DA stakeholder deep dive events, which is what you're all attending today, and these will continue. So hopefully in about 6 weeks' time, if you found this useful, we'll be able to dig into some of the key features of modules 6, 9, 10 and 11. The aim is that we will run market consultation from August, and the market consultation will be where you all have access to the second drafts of the modules, and you'll be able to review them, provide us with feedback, and we'll take all of that into account to produce the third and final draft. The idea is that drafting will be completed this year, and we're not going to hold off on putting out the new wording until the contract creator is ready. We're going to put the wording out so people can use it in analog form as soon as possible. And that wording will have been through a full external legal review. So we're at time. So hopefully now you're able to describe the basic data concepts that have been applied in the CBA redesign, and explain the key changes proposed for modules 5, 7 and 8, and also outline the key project work streams and some of our target timelines. I am. Tim, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to close now, or shall I see if anyone wants to stay on for a few minutes with questions? How would you like to?
Yeah, as you say, Carla, we are pretty much at time, but
Yeah.
I think it's worth asking just three brief questions just to highlight a couple of the major points in your presentation, which thanks very much for that. The first of those is when will MGAA members be able to see the draft wording?
So that is as part of that market consultation piece. I think we're going to work through with yourself and Mike what is the best way for us to share with your community, and perhaps work with you to kind of consolidate their feedback. But that will be from August. That is when you can get your hands on the first draft, the second draft of the modules to review.
Okay, we'll keep in close contact. So yeah, do feed that across as soon as you are able to. And the second question, when will the new wording be published?
So we're not kind of making any promises on the publication as yet, because it really, really depends on how the market consultation goes. The market could love it and think we've done a really good job and there's not many changes, in which case we'll be able to publish sooner. But as you know, with market consultations, there could be a lot of redrafting to get us to that third and final draft. So I don't want to excite anyone by saying it's, in 5 minutes, or worry anyone with thinking it's too long. It really is unknown at this stage.
Thanks, Clara. Finally, what happens if there are clauses in the new wording which we don't agree with?
So I think that will be part of that consultation process. And I think we've had a couple of clauses already come up in our DA wordings workshops where they're a bit sticky, and we think they're a bit contentious, and there's lots of people that say, oh, well, we wouldn't want to use that, we'd want to write it. And all of those clauses that perhaps could see a high level of change, we will include the option for them to be bespoked. And hopefully, as I said, that will come out in the market consultation.
Great. Okay, I'll pass back to you with your closing messages then, and then we'll close off the meeting. Thanks, Carla.
Okay, so the creation of this computable binder is the first step in realizing the digital DA marketplace. And we really are taking the time to design digital foundations, which is what Workstream A is all about. Just as a reminder, Workstream A has two key components: redrafting contractual language and turning that language into data. Change is coming. It is going to look pretty different, so please be ready to embrace it. And it's probably not going to be easy, because change never is. And I think you just need to be open to compromise if we're going to realize all the benefits of digital. I know some people can be very picky about specific wording, and a full stop goes here and a comma goes there, and use this different word. But if we want to be successful in digital, I think we're going to have to let some of those sort of picky bits go. But yeah, that's my closing messages. And then if you've got any follow-up questions, please contact me below. And we also have the DARE website where you can find out any more information. Sorry, we overran slightly, but thank you all for listening.
Thanks very much, Carla, for a very beneficial session. And it would be great to welcome you back in the future for future updates. If anyone has any feedback, don't hesitate to send that to me at tim.richards@mgaa.co.uk. I'll put that together, and I'm sure we'll be welcoming Carla back in the near future. So you can also reach Carla at the contact details which are shown on screen at the moment. So thanks all of you for joining us. Don't forget to provide your feedback, and do look out for forthcoming MGAA events. And I hope you all have a productive afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Carla, and see you all soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.